All right, let's just jump right into this because it's a pretty wild claim. We're going to explore the idea from our source material that Sam Houston, the 19th century frontiersman, politician, first president of Texas, was actually America's very first Green Beret. Yeah, you heard that right. A whole century before the Green Berets even existed.
So before we can even begin to see if this idea holds any water, we've got to be super clear on what we're talking about. According to the source, a modern Green Beret's job is, well, it's pretty specific. They go into another country, train up some rebel fighters, get a rebellion going, and basically destabilize the whole nation, all for America's benefit. That's a very particular skill set.
And that really brings us to the core question here, doesn't it? Could a guy from the 1800s, a frontiersman no less, actually fit this highly specialized modern military job description? To figure that out, we really have to dig into the evidence from his absolutely insane life story.
And that story, it doesn't start in some high-tech training facility. Nope, it starts on the rugged American frontier. This was the place that would forge him, the real proving ground for everything that came next.
He started out life on a pretty typical path for a kid from a wealthy Virginia family. But then everything just changes. When he's 13, his father dies, and the family is suddenly forced to move out to the Tennessee frontier. Total culture shock. Then, just 3 years after that, he runs away from home to go live with the Cherokee. They actually adopt him and give him the name the Raven. And then he joins the army to fight in the War of 1812, where he ends up serving under a man who is going to change his life forever, Andrew Jackson.
This quote, this tells you everything you need to know about who Sam Houston was. During the Battle of Horseshoe Bend, he gets a barbed arrow lodged deep in his thigh. A lieutenant tries to pull it out and is struggling, so Houston draws his sword and tells him, "Try again. If you fail this time, I will smite you to the earth." Well, the lieutenant got the arrow out. Houston was then wounded 2 more times in that same battle and was literally left for dead, but he survived. After the war, his mentor, Andrew Jackson, basically puts his political career on the fast track. He shoots up the ranks, becomes a congressman, then governor of Tennessee. People are talking about him as a future president. But then, it all just crashes and burns. He gets into a scandalous marriage that only lasts 11 weeks, which was a huge deal back then. The scandal forces him to resign in disgrace. So he goes into exile, back to live with the Cherokee, where he apparently earns the not-so-great nickname, the Big Drunk. His career looks totally finished, until he shows up in Washington, D.C. as a delegate for the Cherokee and, well, beats a corrupt congressman with a hickory walking stick.
So this bizarre, violent re-entry onto the national stage is what sets up the main event. This is what our source material calls the Texas Operation.
And here is the absolute crux of the argument. Did Sam Houston just wake up one day and randomly decide to move to Texas, which was Mexican territory at the time? Or, and this is the theory, was he sent there on a secret mission by his old boss, who is now President Andrew Jackson, with the goal of acquiring Texas for the U.S.? Now, there's no smoking gun, no written order, but the argument is that his actions, they just line up perfectly with a covert op.
Yeah, when you actually break down Houston's strategy, it starts to look less like a series of lucky breaks and way more like a deliberate, calculated plan. First, he uses his deep connections with Native American tribes to make sure they'd stay neutral so they wouldn't side with Mexico. Smart. Second, for 3 whole years, he's arming the rebellion, bringing in people, guns, supplies. Third, and this part is just genius, he leads this strategic retreat that makes everyone think he's panicking and running away, but he's actually just stretching the Mexican army's supply lines until they're about to snap. And finally, he makes sure the final showdown happens right near the U.S. border, where, what do you know, an American army just happens to be waiting.
And you have to understand the pressure he was under. The Mexican general, Santa Anna, had just won these brutal, bloody victories at the Alamo and Goliad. Houston and his tiny army of about 400 guys were literally the last line of defense for the Texas Rebellion. Everybody, his own men, the new Texas government, they were all screaming at him to turn around and fight. But he stuck to his plan. And that plan worked perfectly. It all came to a head at the Battle of San Jacinto. Santa Anna got overconfident, chased Houston right into a trap, and the big, decisive battle that would win Texas its independence, yeah, it was over in just 18 minutes. The results of that 18-minute battle are just mind-blowing. Houston's army, which had been beefed up by some American volunteers, lost only 11 men. 11. Santa Anna's army? They had 650 soldiers killed and another 300 captured.
Oh, and one of those captured was Santa Anna himself. It was one of the most lopsided victories you'll ever see. So, having pulled off this incredible operation, Sam Houston suddenly finds himself in a position he probably never, ever expected. He's almost immediately elected president of the brand new country he basically just created. As president, his goals were pretty straightforward. First, keep the peace with the Native American tribes. Second, do not get into another war with a very angry Mexico. And third, slash the new nation's huge debt. But his real endgame, the ultimate goal through all of it, was to get Texas annexed by the United States. But man, leading this new republic was just one crisis after another. He had to put down internal rebellions. He was dealing with new invasions from Mexico. He had to manage these disastrous military raids his rivals launched. And he even had to deal with this bizarre thing called the Archive War, where the citizens of Austin literally wouldn't let him move the government's official papers. It was chaos. The thing is, the U.S. was dragging its feet on annexing Texas, mostly because they were worried about upsetting the whole balance between slave states and free states. So Houston plays his last card. It's a massive bluff. He starts talking to Great Britain, hinting that maybe, the Republic of Texas would be better off as a British territory. The threat of having Great Britain on their northern and southern borders was enough. It finally forced the U.S. government to act. Texas became a state in 1845. So Houston's mission was complete. Texas was officially part of America. But the final chapter of his life would be spent fighting to keep that very nation from ripping itself in two. When he became a U.S. Senator for Texas, Houston had a laser focus on one thing and one thing only: preserving the Union. He never forgot something the Revolutionary War hero Lafayette had told him when he was young, that all the kings in Europe were just sitting around, waiting and hoping for the great American experiment in democracy to fail. Houston was determined to not let that happen on his watch. And he could see the Civil War coming with this terrifying clarity. A full decade before the war even started, he made this chilling prediction. He said the South would be completely ruined and that the victorious North would reap a harvest of assassination, which is just an incredibly eerie forecast of what would happen to Abraham Lincoln. And when that moment of truth finally arrived in 1861, Houston, who was now governor of Texas again, made his final principled stand. He refused to swear an oath of allegiance to the Confederacy because he believed secession was a disaster. And for that, he was thrown out of office. He became an outcast in the very state that he had founded. So you look back at a life that honestly sounds more like a movie script than reality, and you have to ask, how do we judge this guy? What's the final verdict on Sam Houston? His entire life was just a series of unbelievable contradictions. He was an adopted son of the Cherokee people and a celebrated American war hero. He's the only person in U.S. history to have been the governor of two different states. He was the president of his own country and then a U.S. senator. And at the end, he was a Southern slave owner who got kicked out of office for being too loyal to the Union. Which brings us all the way back to the beginning. Was his life just a series of crazy accidents that happened to a larger-than-life person? Or, as our source material suggests, do his actions actually point to something much more deliberate? Was Sam Houston, in fact, America's very first Green Beret, a clandestine operative sent to destabilize a foreign land and bring it under the American flag? That's the question we're left with.